Picture this, a powerful Korean Mafia boss kneeling in the grass before his black nanny, tears streaming down his face as gunfire echoes through his $12 million mansion. Park Ji-hoon, a man who built an empire on blood and fear, who commanded armies and instilled terror across the entire West Coast, was completely destroyed. Not by bullets, not by rival cartels, but by love. Love for a 27-year-old black woman named Amara Williams, who was supposed to be just the help, just another employee caring for his traumatized daughter. But somewhere between stolen kisses and moonlit gardens and desperate confessions in the darkness, she became everything, his salvation, his weakness, his reason to want redemption. And when the Russian mafia discovered this forbidden love, when they kidnapped Amara and threatened to kill her, Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. He burned their empire to ashes, executed men without blinking, chose love over a $500 million deal that could have prevented war. This Korean crime lord was willing to sacrifice everything, his power, his reputation, his entire criminal empire, for the black woman who made him feel human again. But could love really survive in a world built on violence? Could a nanny from Atlanta truly become the queen of a blood-soaked kingdom? What happened next will leave you breathless. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The white marble mansion stood like a fortress in the heart of Beverly Hills, its pristine walls concealing secrets darker than the night sky above. Park Ji-hoon, at 38 years old, commanded his criminal empire from behind those walls with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything in his life. The Baekho organization, the White Tiger, controlled the arms trade and illegal gambling operations across the entire West Coast, and Ji-hoon sat at its apex, untouchable, feared, absolute. But power, as he was discovering, could not fill the void left by death. 6 months had passed since his wife's funeral, 6 months since he'd stood in his tailored black suit accepting condolences from men who dealt in bullets and blood, from women who whispered behind jeweled hands. He'd cried the expected tears, played the grieving husband with convincing precision, and yet, in the privacy of his $12 million estate, surrounded by priceless art and the trappings of wealth beyond measure, Ji-hoon felt nothing but emptiness, a hollow, aching void that even his 4-year-old daughter, Gia, couldn't fill, though God knew he tried. The child had stopped smiling the day her mother died in that carefully orchestrated car accident. Oh, the police had called it tragic, unfortunate, a terrible loss. But Ji-hoon knew better. In his world, there were no accidents, only consequences and carefully executed plans. His wife had known too much, had threatened to talk, had become a liability he couldn't afford, and so he'd made the call, signed her death warrant with the same cold calculation he applied to every business decision. But he hadn't anticipated the guilt, or the way Gia's silent tears would cut deeper than any bullet. The nannies came and went like seasons, each one lasting barely a week before the combination of Gia's trauma and Ji-hoon's temperament drove them away. He worked until dawn, conducting meetings that ended with muffled gunshots from the basement, and expected the household staff to simply manage, to deal with a broken child and a father who was rarely present, even when physically in the room. The 14th nanny quit on a Tuesday morning, fleeing the mansion in tears after Gia threw a complete breakdown, screaming for her dead mother until her voice went hoarse. Ji-hoon's assistant, Mrs. Chen, looked at him with barely concealed exasperation as she scheduled yet another round of interviews. "We need someone special this time," she said firmly, her tone the only one in his organization that dared approach insubordination. "Someone who actually understands children, not just another glorified servant." Ji-hoon waved his hand dismissively, already turning back to the weapons manifest on his desk. "Fine, handle it. I don't care who you hire as long as they can keep Gia quiet." That was how Amara Williams entered his life, through a door he barely noticed opening. She arrived for her interview on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in a modest navy blue suit that hugged curves she clearly tried to downplay. At 27 years old, she carried herself with a dignity that made Ji-hoon's assistant sit up straighter, made the guards at the gate address her as ma'am instead of just waving her through. Her skin was the rich, deep brown of polished ebony, her natural curls pulled back into a professional bun that still couldn't quite contain their wild beauty. When she smiled, and she did smile, genuinely, warmly, her entire face lit up with a kindness that seemed almost alien in a house built on violence and fear. Ji-hoon was in his office when Mrs. Chen brought her in for the formal introduction. He glanced up from his laptop, gave Amara the briefest of nods, and returned to his email without a second thought. Just another nanny, just another temporary solution to a permanent problem. "Mr. Park." Amara's voice was soft but clear, carrying the slight southern lilt of someone raised far from California's cold glamour. "I understand Gia has been through significant trauma. I want you to know that I specialize in working with children who've experienced loss. My thesis in pedagogy focused specifically on—" "Mrs. Chen will explain your duties," Ji-hoon interrupted, not bothering to look up again. "If you can keep my daughter stable, you're hired. If not, you'll be gone by the end of the week like all the others." He missed the flash of determination in Amara's dark eyes, missed the way her jaw set with quiet resolve, missed the moment Mrs. Chan led her to Gia's playroom, where the child sat alone, surrounded by untouched toys, staring at nothing with eyes too old for her small face. But an hour later, working in his study, Ji-hoon heard something he hadn't heard in 6 long months. His daughter's laughter. It drifted through the mansion's halls like music, high and pure and achingly beautiful. Ji-hoon froze mid-sentence in his phone conversation with a Russian contact, his heart doing something strange in his chest. He ended the call abruptly and moved to his office door, listening. More laughter. Gia's voice, bright with genuine joy, saying, "Again, do it again, Miss Amara." And then another voice, warm, musical, filled with such authentic happiness that it made something crack in Ji-hoon's carefully constructed emotional armor. "Okay, baby girl, but this time you have to help me. Can you make the funny face, too?" Ji-hoon found himself walking toward the sound before his mind consciously made the decision. He stopped at the playroom doorway, and what he saw made him grip the doorframe hard enough that his knuckles went white. Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, her suit jacket discarded, her white blouse slightly rumpled, playing some elaborate game that involved hand puckets and ridiculous voices. Gia, his broken, silent Gia, was laughing so hard she could barely breathe, her small hands clutching at Amara's arm as the black woman made a stuffed elephant dance across the carpet. And then Mr. Elephant said to Miss Giraffe, "Your neck is so long, you must be able to see all the way to the stars." Gia giggled uncontrollably. "That's silly. Giraffes can't see stars during the day." "Oh, you're right. Mr. Elephant forgot about that. He's not very smart sometimes, is he?" No, Jia beamed, and in that moment she looked like the child she was supposed to be, innocent, joyful, whole. Mrs. Chen appeared beside Ji-hoon, smiling knowingly. I hired her. On the spot. She starts today, moving into the West Wing tonight. 85,000 annually, plus benefits. She paused, watching his face. Unless you object? Ji-hoon shook his head slowly, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene before him. No, no objections. Whatever she needs. His voice came out rougher than intended. Just make sure she stays. That was the moment everything changed, though Ji-hoon wouldn't realize it until much, much later. That was the moment Amara Williams became not just his daughter's nanny, but the greatest threat to his carefully controlled existence, because as he stood there watching this beautiful black woman bring light back into his daughter's eyes, something stirred in the emptiness of his chest. Something dangerous, something he couldn't afford to feel. Amara moved into the West Wing that same evening with 3 suitcases and a quiet determination to maintain professional boundaries. Mrs. Chen had been very clear during the hiring process. Mr. Park valued privacy above all else. There were parts of the mansion, the basement, the East Wing office complex, the garage where certain vehicles came and went at odd hours, that were strictly off limits. There would be men with guns, late-night meetings, phone calls, and rapid Korean that ended abruptly when staff appeared. Ask no questions, Mrs. Chen had said simply. Care for Jia, keep your distance from Mr. Park's business affairs, collect your very generous salary, go home to your mother in Atlanta debt-free in a few years. It seemed simple enough. Amara had accepted the position not out of naivety, but out of necessity. Her mother's medical bills had reached catastrophic levels, her student loan debt was crushing, and the $85,000 annual salary was more than triple what any normal nanny position offered. She knew what Park Ji-hoon was. She'd done her research. The internet was full of whispered rumors, carefully worded news articles that danced around the truth, speculation about the prominent businessman with ties to organized crime. But Jia needed her. That much had been clear within 5 minutes of meeting the traumatized child, and Amara had spent 4 years studying how to help children heal from exactly this kind of pain. So she unpacked her belongings, set clear rules for herself, and focused on the job at hand. The first week passed in careful routine. Amara woke Jia up each morning, prepared her breakfast, conducted age-appropriate educational activities, played in the sprawling garden, read stories, gave baths, sang lullabies. The child blossomed under consistent, loving care. The nightmares decreased. The smiles increased. Jia started asking questions again, started engaging with the world instead of retreating from it. And Park Ji-hoon barely existed in Amara's awareness. He was a shadow that left before dawn and returned after midnight, a cold presence that occasionally appeared at doorways, watching with those dark, unreadable eyes before disappearing again into whatever dark business consumed his life. Amara told herself she didn't notice him, didn't notice the way his expensive suits fit his lean, powerful frame, didn't notice the sharp intelligence in his face or the barely contained violence that seemed to simmer just beneath his controlled exterior, didn't notice the way his jaw clenched when he looked at his daughter, as if her happiness caused him physical pain. She was professional, detached, focused, until the night she found herself in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and Park Ji-hoon walked in to find her singing. Jia had woken screaming from another nightmare, thrashing in her small bed with tears streaming down her face, calling for her mother in broken sobs that tore in Amara's heart. It had taken 20 minutes of gentle rocking, soft reassurances, and whispered promises that everything would be all right before the child finally calmed enough to ask for warm milk, the comfort drink her mother used to make. Amara had carried Gia downstairs, settling her on the kitchen counter while she prepared the milk, humming softly to keep the little girl distracted. She wore only her ivory silk robe over a thin nightgown, her natural curls loose and wild around her shoulders, her feet bare against the cold marble floor. The kitchen was bathed in moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. She was pouring honey into the warming milk, singing a lullaby her own mother used to sing, something old and soulful from her grandmother's time, when she felt the shift in the air, that electric charge that meant she was no longer alone. Amara turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Park Ji-hoon stood frozen in the kitchen doorway like a man who'd seen a ghost. He wore black silk pajama bottoms and nothing else, his torso lean and carved with muscle, his dark hair disheveled from sleep or the lack of it. But it was his eyes that made Amara's heart stutter. Those cold, controlled eyes that she'd only ever seen filled with ice were now burning with something else entirely. Hunger. Raw, undisguised, devastating hunger. "Senor Park," Amara whispered, her voice coming out breathless as she instinctively clutched her robe tighter. The movement only seemed to draw his gaze downward, tracking the curves of her body beneath the thin silk. She felt exposed, vulnerable, achingly aware of how inappropriate this situation was. Her boss, in the middle of the night, both of them barely dressed. Ji-hoon's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw worked as if he was physically restraining himself from speaking, from moving, from crossing the distance between them. The silence stretched, thick with tension that made Amara's skin prickle with awareness. "Senor Park?" She tried again, her southern accent thickening with nervousness. "Gia had a nightmare. I was just—" "Ji-hoon." His voice came out rough, almost harsh, cutting through her explanation. He took one step into the kitchen, and Amara's pulse jumped. "When we're alone, call me Ji-hoon." The intimacy of that request, the command disguised as permission, sent warning bells clanging through Amara's mind. This was dangerous. This was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. She was his employee. He was a criminal, a man who ordered deaths before breakfast and built an empire on violence and fear. But God help her, the way he was looking at her made her feel like the most precious thing in the entire world. Amara swallowed hard, breaking eye contact to focus on the milk heating on the stove. "I should get Gia back to bed. The milk is almost ready." She turned away, desperate to escape that burning gaze, but she could feel him watching her, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch as she finished preparing the milk, as she lifted Gia from the counter, as she walked past him with the child in her arms. Their bodies didn't touch. They maintained careful distance. But as Amara passed, Ji-hoon's scent enveloped her, something woodsy and expensive, with an underlying hint of danger, and she had to fight the insane urge to lean closer, to breathe him in deeper. "Good night, Ji-hoon," she whispered, and fled before she could do something catastrophically stupid. Behind her, Park Ji-hoon stood alone in the kitchen, his hands trembling with the force of his self-control, and knew with absolute certainty that he was in serious trouble. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the night after that. Instead, Ji-hoon found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He rearranged his schedule to work from home. Suddenly, meetings that required his presence at warehouses or casinos could be handled remotely. Weapons deals could be negotiated via secure video conference. His lieutenants raised eyebrows, but knew better than to question their boss's decisions. The truth was shameful in its simplicity. Park Ji-hoon, feared crime lord who'd built an empire through ruthlessness and strategic brutality, was rearranging his entire life just to catch glimpses of his daughter's nanny. He told himself it was about Gia, about monitoring her progress, ensuring the therapy was working, being a more present father. But that lie crumbled every time he found himself standing at his office window watching Amara play with Gia in the garden below. God, the woman was beautiful, not in the delicate, fragile way his late wife had been, but with a strength and vitality that made his hands ache to touch her. She wore modest clothes, always professional, always appropriate, but they couldn't hide the lush curves of her body, the elegant line of her neck, the way her hips swayed when she walked. And when she smiled, when she laughed that musical laugh that seemed to brighten the entire world, Ji-hoon felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought died with his conscience years ago. He started finding excuses to interrupt their time together, needing to discuss Gia's schedule, asking about her educational progress, suggesting they all have dinner together as a family because the nanny should eat with us, not separately like hired help. Those dinners became exquisite torture. Ji-hoon would sit at the head of the table, Gia chattering happily between bites, while Amara sat across from him looking like a goddess carved from ebony. He couldn't stop staring at her mouth as she ate, imagining what those full lips would feel like against his. Couldn't stop watching her hands, graceful and expressive, and wondering how they'd feel running over his skin. Couldn't stop noticing every little detail, the way she bit her lower lip when thinking, the slight flush on her cheeks when their eyes met, the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. And Amara felt it, every heated glance, every moment his gaze lingered too long on her face, her lips, the curve of her breasts beneath increasingly conservative blouses. She started wearing higher necklines, pulling her hair back more severely, avoiding being alone with him whenever possible. But Park Ji-hoon didn't know how to respect boundaries when he wanted something, and he wanted Amara Williams with a ferocity that terrified him. The accidental touches started innocently enough, his hand brushing hers when they both reached for Gia's juice cup, his fingers grazing her arm as he passed behind her chair, standing close enough that their bodies nearly touched when they both leaned over Gia's coloring book. Each contact sent electricity shooting through Amara's body. Her nipples would harden beneath her bra, her breath would catch, her skin would flush with heat that had nothing to do with the California sunshine and everything to do with the dangerous man who seemed determined to unravel her self-control. She knew she should quit, should pack her bags and run back to Atlanta before the situation exploded into something irreversible. But every time she thought about leaving, she'd see Gia's bright smile, hear her laughter, feel the child's small arms wrapping around her neck in trusting affection. And if she was being honest with herself, painfully, shamefully honest, she'd also see Ji-hoon's eyes. Those dark, tortured eyes that looked at her like she was water in the desert, like she was salvation itself. 3 months passed in this excruciating dance of desire and denial. 3 months where the tension in the mansion grew so thick it felt like breathing through honey. 3 months where Amara lay awake at night, her body aching with needs she tried desperately to ignore, while 1 floor below, Ji-hoon paced his bedroom like a caged animal, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to go to her, claim her, make her his. And then came Gia's 4th birthday party, and everything fell apart. The mansion was transformed into a children's wonderland. Pink balloons, elaborate decorations, a bouncy castle in the garden, entertainment that cost more than most people's annual salary. But it wasn't just a party for Jia, it was a statement. Park Ji-hoon's way of showing his organization and the wider Korean community that he was a family man, a devoted father, someone with normalcy and respectability despite the blood on his hands. The guests were primarily families from LA's Korean elite, business owners who laundered his money, politicians who turned blind eyes to his operations, fellow criminals dressed in designer suits and pretending to be legitimate. Their children played while the adults networked, making deals between sips of expensive champagne. And then there was Yoon Hae-won. She arrived fashionably late in a white designer dress that probably cost more than Amara's entire wardrobe, her glossy black hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. At 35, she was a widow herself. Her husband, another crime boss, had been killed in a territorial dispute 2 years prior. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and made her interest in Park Ji-hoon abundantly clear from the moment she air-kissed his cheeks in greeting. Amara watched from across the lawn where she was organizing games for the children, and something ugly twisted in her stomach. Jealousy. Hot, bitter, irrational jealousy that she had absolutely no right to feel. She was the nanny, the hired help, the black woman who didn't belong in this world of wealth and power and carefully maintained appearances. Hae-won was Ji-hoon's equal, Korean, sophisticated, connected to his world in ways Amara never could be. But watching Hae-won touch Ji-hoon's arm, lean close to whisper in his ear, laugh at his comments with practiced charm, made Amara want to scream. Throughout the party, Hae-won positioned herself at Ji-hoon's side like she belonged there, and she treated Amara like furniture, invisible, interchangeable, beneath notice. When she wanted something, she snapped her fingers at the help. When Amara passed by with trays of juice for the children, Hae-won stepped into her path without acknowledging her existence, forcing Amara to walk around. The breaking point came during dinner when Hae-won joined them at the family table uninvited and proceeded to order Amara around like a servant. More water, the white wine, not the red. These utensils have water spots, bring clean ones. Each command was delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes, with a condescension that made Amara's cheeks burn with humiliation. It's so difficult to find qualified nannies these days, Hae-won commented to Ji-hoon, her eyes sliding over Amara dismissively. Especially ones who are, she paused deliberately, her smile sharpening, exotic. The word hung in the air like a slap. Exotic. Not professional, not educated, not skilled. Exotic, like Amara was some curiosity, some foreign object brought in for entertainment, rather than a person with dignity and worth. Ji-hoon's fork clattered against his plate with enough force that everyone at the table jumped. His eyes went absolutely cold, and for the first time, Amara saw the crime lord fully emerge, the man who ruled through fear, who ordered executions without blinking. Amara is the most qualified educator I've ever encountered, he said, his voice deadly quiet. My daughter loves her. She's brought light back into this house. He leaned forward slightly, and Hae-won actually flinched. And he stopped, his jaw clenching so hard Amara could see the muscle jumping. I appreciate her work immensely. But the damage was done. Tears burned behind Amara's eyes, tears of rage and hurt and the crushing weight of not belonging. She stood abruptly, mumbling something about checking on dessert, and fled into the house before anyone could see her cry. She made it to the garden, the far corner where flowering jasmine created a private alcove before the tears spilled over. Amara sank onto a stone bench, pressing her hands to her face, trying to muffle the sobs that tore from her throat. She didn't belong here, would never belong here. She was fooling herself, thinking she could exist in Park Ji-hoon's world, could navigate the casual racism and elitism and the constant reminder that she was other, different, less than. Amara! His voice came from directly in front of her, and she looked up to find Ji-hoon kneeling on the grass at her feet. Kneeling, this powerful man who commanded armies and instilled terror, on his knees in the dew-wet grass, his expression raw with something that looked like pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and his hands came up to cup her face with a gentleness that destroyed her. His thumbs brushed away her tears, and his own eyes looked suspiciously bright. "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her sooner, should have thrown her out the moment she disrespected you." "I'm just the nanny," Amara choked out. "I don't matter to people like her, to your world." "You're not just anything." Ji-hoon's voice was fierce, almost desperate. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words he couldn't quite say. His eyes searched hers in the moonlight, and what Amara saw there made her heart stop. "You're everything." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truth. The moonlight painted Ji-hoon's face in silver and shadow, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the intensity burning in his dark eyes. Amara's breath came in shaky gasps as his thumbs continued their gentle path across her tear-stained cheeks, and she knew, God, she knew, that if she didn't stop this right now, everything would change forever. "Ji-hoon, we can't," she started, but the words died in her throat when he leaned closer. "Tell me you don't feel this," he demanded, his voice rough with barely restrained emotion. "Tell me I'm alone in this madness. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you every single moment of every single day." Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should lie, should protect them both from this impossible situation, but looking into his eyes, seeing the raw vulnerability there, the desperate hope mixed with fear, she couldn't force the words out. "I think about you," she whispered, and watched something break open in his expression. "I shouldn't. You're my employer. You're dangerous. You're from a world I don't understand. But I do. I think about you constantly, and it's driving me insane." Ji-hoon made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a growl, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like Amara had imagined in her secret, shameful fantasies. It wasn't gentle or exploratory. It was devastating, consuming. Years of loneliness and months of unbearable tension exploded in that contact. Ji-hoon kissed her like a man starving, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, his hands sliding into her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. And Amara, God help her, kissed him back with equal desperation. Her hands clutched at his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath his expensive shirt, and she opened her mouth to him with a moan that seemed to drive him wild. His tongue swept against hers, claiming, possessing, and heat flooded through her body like wildfire. Every nerve ending came alive. Every inch of her skin felt too sensitive, too aware of him, his scent, his taste, the solid strength of his body pressed against hers. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers. His hands were shaking where they cradled her face. "I know this is wrong," he breathed against her lips. "I know I'm putting you in danger just by wanting you. My world is violent and ugly, and everyone I touch gets stained by it. But Amara—" He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, and what she saw there made tears spring fresh. "You make me feel human again, like I'm more than just the monster everyone sees. Like maybe I deserve something good in this cursed life." "You do deserve good things," Amara whispered, her own hands coming up to frame his face. "But Ji-hoon, we have to think about this, about Ji-ah, about what happens when your world collides with—" He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. "I don't care about my world right now. I don't care about consequences or complications or anything except this, except you." And then he was standing, pulling her up with him, and they were stumbling deeper into the garden where the jasmine grew thick and no one from the party could see them. Ji-hoon's hands were everywhere at once, sliding down her back, gripping her hips, tracing the curves he'd been obsessing over for months. Amara arched into his touch, her professional demeanor completely shattered, replaced by pure need. They made love there, beneath the stars, on the soft grass with jasmine petals falling around them like snow. It was urgent and desperate and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Ji-hoon worshipped every inch of Amara's brown skin with his hands and mouth, whispering in Korean, words she didn't understand but felt in her soul. And when he finally claimed her completely, when their bodies joined with a perfection that made them both cry out, Amara knew there was no going back. This man, this dangerous, broken, complicated man had marked her soul as surely as she'd marked his. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Ji-hoon held Amara like she was something precious and fragile, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair. "Not just tonight. Stay in my life, in my bed. Be mine, Amara." She should have said no, should have explained all the reasons why this could never work, but instead she turned in his arms and kissed him again, and that was answer enough. The following weeks transformed the Park Mansion into something new, a battleground of desire and stolen moments and barely concealed passion. Ji-hoon and Amara couldn't stay away from each other. They maintained professional appearances during the day when staff was around, when Ji-ah needed attention, when business required Ji-hoon's focus. But the moment they were alone, they combusted. Stolen kisses in empty hallways, heated encounters in Ji-hoon's study after Ji-ah was asleep, mornings where Amara awoke in Ji-hoon's bed, wrapped in silk sheets and strong arms, feeling simultaneously more alive and more terrified than she'd ever been. "You're my addiction," Ji-hoon would whisper against her skin, mapping her body with reverent hands. "My beautiful, forbidden addiction." And Amara would lose herself in him all over again, ignoring the warning bells that rang louder each day. But Ji-hoon's world didn't allow for happiness without consequences. His enemies watched constantly, looking for weaknesses, waiting for opportunities, and Park Ji-hoon had just revealed his greatest weakness without even realizing it. Dmitry Volkov was a Russian arms dealer who'd been trying to muscle into Baiko territory for years. He was ruthless, calculating, and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When his surveillance team brought him photos of Park Ji-hoon kissing his black nanny in the garden, of the crime lord sneaking into her bedroom late at night, of the tender way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, Volkov smiled. Everyone knew Park Ji-hoon loved nothing and no one, that his late wife had been a business arrangement, that his daughter was a responsibility but not a weakness. But this nanny, this beautiful black woman who made the untouchable crime lord tremble with want, she was leverage. The kidnapping happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Amara had just picked Gia up from her private preschool, walking toward the armored SUV where Ji-hoon's driver waited. She was laughing at something Gia said, completely relaxed, when the black van screeched to a stop beside them. 4 men in masks grabbed Amara before she could even scream. Gia's bodyguard reacted instantly, drawing his weapon, but one of the kidnappers held a gun to Amara's head, and everyone froze. "Let the child go," the man said in heavily accented English. "We only want the woman." Amara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode, but her training kicked in. She looked at Gia's terrified face and forced herself to smile. "It's okay, baby. Go with Mr. Kim. Everything will be fine. Tell your daddy—" Her voice cracked. "Tell him I'm sorry." They threw her into the van, and the world went black. When Amara woke, she was tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Her head throbbed where they'd hit her, and fear threatened to overwhelm her completely. But she forced herself to stay calm, to assess the situation, to survive. A man walked into her line of vision, older, with cold blue eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. "Hello, Miss Williams. My name is Dmitry Volkov. You and I are going to help each other send a message to Park Ji-hoon." Back at the mansion, Ji-hoon received the call from his driver and felt his entire world stop. "What do you mean she's gone? Where is she?" His roar of fury echoed through the entire estate. Within minutes, every member of the Beho organization was mobilized. Within an hour, Ji-hoon had the video of Amara tied to a chair, terrified but unharmed, while Volkov's voice delivered the message. "Your weakness has a price, Park. $50 million or your pretty black bitch dies. You have 24 hours. The phone in Ji-hoon's hand shattered under the force of his grip. His face had gone completely white, except for 2 spots of color high on his cheekbones. His second in command, Min-ho, had never seen his boss like this, absolutely unhinged, barely holding on to sanity by his fingernails. "Find him," Ji-hoon said, his voice deadly calm despite the madness in his eyes. "Find every property Volkov owns, every business, every safe house, and burn it all to the ground. Kill everyone who works for him, their families, their associates, everyone." "Boss, if we go that hard, we'll start a war." "I don't care." Ji-hoon's control finally snapped. He swept everything off his desk in one violent motion, sending laptops and files crashing to the floor. "He took her. He touched what's mine. I will paint this entire city red with Russian blood before I let him hurt her. Do you understand me?" Min-ho nodded quickly. He understood perfectly. For the first time in 20 years, Park Ji-hoon was operating on pure emotion instead of cold strategy, and that made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. The assault on Volkov's operations was brutal and swift. Ji-hoon led 20 of his best men on a rampage through the Russians' territory, leaving bodies and burning buildings in their wake. He moved through each location like death incarnate, his face a mask of cold fury, his hands steady as he pulled the trigger again and again. Nothing mattered except getting Amara back. Not money, not diplomacy, not the potential consequences of all-out war. Just her. They found Volkov's main warehouse at dawn, and Ji-hoon didn't bother with strategy or stealth. He kicked in the door with his gun raised and started shooting. The firefight was intense, bullets flying, men screaming, blood spattering the concrete. But Ji-hoon fought like a man possessed, like someone who had nothing left to lose. When he finally burst into the room where they held Amara, still tied to that chair but miraculously unharmed because Volkov had wanted to use her as a bargaining chip alive, something in Ji-hoon's chest cracked wide open. Amara! Her name came out broken, desperate. He was across the room in seconds, cutting her bonds with shaking hands, pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you okay? Did he touch you? Amara, look at me." "I'm okay. I'm not hurt, Ji-hoon." A sound behind them made Ji-hoon spin, shoving Amara behind his body protectively. Dmitry Volkov stood in the doorway, bloodied and cornered, his gun raised but his hands shaking. "You'll start a war over some black whore," Volkov spat. "Destroy everything for—" Ji-hoon shot him. Once, twice, 3 times, and then he kept shooting until his clip was empty and Volkov's body was a ruined mess on the floor. Amara watched it all, watched the man she loved kill without hesitation, without remorse, his face completely devoid of emotion. Watched him transform into the monster everyone whispered about, the feared crime lord who built his empire on blood and violence. And for the first time since this all began, reality crashed down on her with crushing weight. This was who Park Ji-hoon really was. Not the tender lover who whispered sweet words in her ear, not the devoted father who smiled at his daughter's laughter, but this, a killer who executed men without blinking, who painted walls with blood and felt nothing. Ji-hoon turned back to her, his face softening instantly, becoming the man she knew again. "Let's get you home," he said gently, reaching for her hand. But Amara flinched back, and Ji-hoon's entire world shattered at that single movement. The ride back to the mansion was silent, suffocating in its tension. Ji-hoon sat beside Amara in the back of the armored SUV, careful not to touch her even though every instinct screamed to pull her close, to reassure himself she was real and safe and his. But she'd flinched away from him, from his blood-stained hands, from the monster she'd finally seen clearly. Amara stared out the window, her body rigid, her mind replaying the execution over and over. The cold efficiency of it, the way Ji-hoon had emptied his weapon into a man who was already dying, the complete absence of humanity in his eyes during those terrible seconds. She'd known what he was, had known abstractly, intellectually, but knowing and witnessing were entirely different things. The man who made love to her with reverent tenderness, who played tea party with his daughter, who looked at her like she hung with stars, that man had just committed murder without a single tremor of remorse. When they arrived home, Jia came running, her small face streaked with tears. Miss Amara, you're back!" The child threw herself into Amara's arms, and Amara held her tight, burying her face in Jia's hair to hide her own tears. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm safe. Everything's okay." But everything wasn't okay, and as Ji-hoon watched Amara carry his daughter upstairs without looking back at him, he knew with devastating certainty that he'd lost her. The next 3 days were torture beyond anything Ji-hoon had experienced in 20 years of violence. Amara remained in her room, caring for Jia during the day, but avoiding him completely. She wouldn't meet his eyes, wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't let him touch her or explain or apologize for being exactly what he'd always been, a monster. On the fourth night, Ji-hoon couldn't take it anymore. He found her in the garden, their garden, where they'd first made love, sitting on the stone bench with her arms wrapped around herself. "Amara," his voice cracked on her name. "Please, please talk to me." She looked up, and the pain in her eyes nearly drove him to his knees. "What do you want me to say, Ji-hoon? That it's okay? That I can just forget watching you kill a man? That I can pretend the blood on your hands doesn't exist?" "I did what I had to do." The words exploded from him, desperate and raw. "He took you. He threatened to kill you. What was I supposed to do? Let him live? Let him come after you again? After Gia?" "I know why you did it," Amara said quietly, and fresh tears spilled down her beautiful face. "I understand it even, but understanding doesn't change what I saw, doesn't change the fact that the man I love is capable of—" She choked on the words. "I'm terrified, Ji-hoon, terrified of your world, terrified of what loving you means, terrified that one day I'll wake up and you'll be dead or arrested, or that someone else will use me as leverage and more people will die because of what we are to each other." Ji-hoon did fall to his knees then, right there in the grass before her, this powerful man reduced to raw desperation. "I know. God, Amara, I know. My world is poison. Everything I touch turns to blood and violence. You deserve so much better than this, than me." He pulled an envelope from his jacket with shaking hands and set it on the bench beside her. "There's a deed to a penthouse in a safe neighborhood. $200,000 in an account under your name, enough to pay your mother's medical bills, your debts, to start over somewhere far from here." His voice broke completely. "Take it. Take Gia's college fund, too, if you need it. Just be safe. Be free. Have the life you deserve." Amara stared at the envelope like it was a snake. You're sending me away?" "I'm giving you the choice I should have given you from the beginning." Ji-hoon forced himself to meet her eyes, even though it killed him to see the devastation there. "I love you, Amara. I love you more than I thought this dead heart could ever love anyone. But loving you means wanting you to be happy and safe, and you can't be either of those things in my world." He stood, every movement feeling like it took years off his life. "The money is yours regardless of what you choose. You've earned it 1,000 times over just by bringing light into this dark house, by loving my daughter, by making me feel human again, even if only for a few stolen months." He turned to leave, to walk away before he broke down completely, but Amara's voice stopped him. "Where's Gia in all of this?" Ji-hoon's shoulders hunched. "She'll be devastated, but she's young, she'll heal. I'll find another nanny who—" "She won't heal," Amara's voice suddenly fierce. "She lost her mother 6 months ago, and now you want to rip away the only other maternal figure she's had? You want to traumatize that little girl all over again because you're too scared to fight for what we have." Ji-hoon spun around, hope and confusion warring on his face. "What are you saying?" Amara stood, and even with tears streaming down her face, she was the most magnificent thing he'd ever seen. "I'm saying that yes, I'm terrified. Yes, watching you kill that man was one of the most horrific things I've ever experienced. Yes, your world is dangerous and violent and completely foreign to everything I've ever known." She took a step toward him. "But I'm also saying that I love you, Park Ji-hoon. I love the man who holds his daughter while she sleeps because he's afraid she'll have nightmares. I love the man who looks at me like a miracle. I love the man who'd burn down the entire world to keep me safe." Another step. "I saw what you did and it terrified me, but I also saw why you did it. I saw a man who loved so fiercely he'd commit any sin to protect what's his. And maybe that makes me crazy, maybe it makes me foolish, but I'd rather be terrified and alive with you than safe and empty without you. Ji-hoon couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was hearing. Amara, you don't know what you're saying. The danger, the violence, it never stops. There will always be another Volkov, another threat, another... Then we face it together, Amara said, closing the distance between them and taking his face in her hands. But I have conditions, Ji-hoon. If I stay, if we do this, I'm not some hidden mistress you keep locked away. I'm not a secret or a weakness or something to be ashamed of. If I'm in your world, then I'm really in it. No more lies, no more hiding, and you don't get to make decisions about what's best for me anymore. I decide what I can handle. I decide what risks I'm willing to take. Understood? For the first time in days, something like hope flickered in Ji-hoon's eyes. You're sure? Because once you commit to this, there's no safe way out. You'll be marked as mine, and that means... I know what it means, Amara interrupted. I'm not naive, but I'm also not weak. I'm a strong black woman who survived poverty, discrimination, and more hardship than you can imagine to get where I am. I can survive your world too, as long as I have you beside me. Ji-hoon pulled her into his arms with a sound that was half laugh, half sob. God, I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I promise, I swear on everything I have, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. They kissed there in the moonlight, sealing a promise that was both beautiful and impossible. And from that night forward, everything changed. Ji-hoon didn't hide their relationship anymore. At the next meeting with his lieutenants, he introduced Amara as the woman who holds my heart and my future. The shocked silence that followed was deafening. The murmurs of disapproval, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed racism, it all came crashing down like a wave. But Ji-hoon made his position crystal clear. Anyone who disrespects Amara answers to me personally. She is under my protection. Touch her, insult her, even look at her wrong, and you will disappear. Am I understood? Two subordinates who'd made racist comments about the boss's black whore in private conversations vanished the next day. The message was received. Amara Williams was untouchable. But the Korean community's reaction was brutal. Whispers followed them everywhere. Former allies distanced themselves. Society matrons who'd once courted Ji-hoon's favor now turned cold shoulders. The scandal of the powerful Baiko leader with a black nanny consumed gossip circles throughout Los Angeles. Amara weathered it with her head high and her dignity intact, but Ji-hoon saw the toll it took. Saw how her shoulders tensed when they entered rooms full of judging eyes, saw the hurt flash across her face when women whispered loud enough for her to hear. I'm sorry, he told her one night after a particularly brutal dinner party. I'm sorry my world is so ugly, so cruel. Amara turned in his arms, her beautiful face serious. Your world doesn't define us, we define us, and anyone who can't see how lucky you are to have me doesn't deserve our energy. God, this woman, this incredible, strong, impossible woman who faced down racism and violence and the weight of his entire dark empire without flinching. Ji-hoon had never respected anyone more in his entire life. But the true test came 6 months later, when the Mexican cartel approached with their proposal. Carlos Mendez controlled the southern territories and wanted to expand north. His offer was simple: marry his daughter Sophia to seal a partnership worth $500 million and guaranteed peace across the West Coast. It was the kind of deal Ji-hoon would have accepted without hesitation 2 years ago. Strategic, profitable, advantageous. But now he had Amara, and no amount of money or power could make him betray her. "No," he said flatly during the negotiation. "I already have my woman. The deal is off." Carlos's face darkened. "You're refusing a $500 million partnership over some temporary arrangement? Be smart, Park. Business before pleasure." "Amara isn't pleasure or business," Ji-hoon said coldly. "She's my future, my family, and I don't negotiate when it comes to her." The refusal sparked tensions that threatened war. The cartel saw it as an insult. Other organizations questioned Ji-hoon's judgment. Even some of his own men wondered if he'd lost his mind, choosing love over such a massive opportunity. Amara found out through Minho, who'd remained loyal despite his concerns. When she confronted Ji-hoon that night, her eyes blazed with anger and confusion. $500 million? Are you insane? You can't throw away that kind of money for me. "Watch me," he said simply. "Ji-hoon, this could start a war. Your men could die because you—" "Because I love you more than anything else in this world," he interrupted, pulling her close. "More than money, more than power, more than this entire cursed empire I've built. You are my priority, Amara, always." She stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why would you risk everything for me?" Ji-hoon cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Because before you I was dead inside, just a functioning corpse going through the motions of living. But you brought me back to life. You made me feel again, hope again, want to be better again." His voice cracked. "You're not just the woman I love. You're my salvation, and I would burn this entire world down before I'd let it take you from me." Amara kissed him through her tears, and in that moment she understood the true depth of what they'd found together. This wasn't just passion or attraction or even love in the conventional sense. This was two broken souls finding completion in each other, finding redemption in the impossible space between their worlds. "Then we face whatever comes together," she whispered against his lips, "no matter what." The cartel retaliated 3 weeks later with an assault on the mansion. Armed men, explosives, a coordinated attack designed to teach Park Ji-hoon what happened when he insulted powerful people. Ji-hoon had been expecting it. His security was prepared, but nothing could have prepared him for the terror of hearing gunfire while Amara and Gia were in the house. He got them to the hidden bunker beneath the mansion, a reinforced safe room designed for exactly this scenario, and stood guard at the door while his men fought above. The sounds of battle filtered down, gunshots, explosions, screams. Gia cried in Amara's arms while Amara tried desperately to stay calm for the child's sake. In the dim emergency lighting of the bunker, Ji-hoon finally let his guard drop completely. If this story moved you, pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged for who you love, dismissed because of where you came from, or underestimated because you didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of worthy? Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for something real, even when the whole world told you it was impossible? Share your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about redemption, courage, and love that defies all boundaries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.